we're going to talk about the beginnings of Unit 8, which is all about evolution. And these evolution or Unit 8 videos are actually going to be split up into a couple different parts. At first, we're going to talk about the evidence of evolution and some of the trends that we see in hominid evolution, or basically how humans evolved. In the second part of this unit, we'll talk about how evolution actually happens, things like natural selection or some other mechanisms such as genetic drift, gene flow, and how mutations and genetic recombination can also increase genetic variation in a population. So at first, let's get started with some of the evidence of evolution. So the big question is, where's the evidence? So we have five different pieces of evidence that we will be discussing. And in today's video, we'll actually be discussing biogeography and the fossil record. So we'll talk about numbers 1 and 2 in our first video. So let's talk a little bit about biogeography. Now, biogeography is the study of where organisms live now and where they and their ancestors lived in the past. So we take a look at closely related species and see how they differentiate themselves in different climates. We can also take a look at, for example, the variations in finches on the Galapagos Islands. So while the climates are not very different in the Galapagos, we also see a variety of different types of niches. So here's a little bit of picture or a little idea of the picture here, the different types of finches that we might see on the Galapagos Islands. And we have a bunch of different types of food that's available. We have fruit, insects, cactus, very specific type of plant, seeds. And so each of these types of food creates a different type of niche for a different finch. So if you take a look at the different finches over on the right here, these are ground finches. These are little finches that actually, they'll eat seeds and their beaks are used for crushing. And so you can kind of see how powerful their beaks are. We see these things called probing beaks. Now, some of them could be insect eaters, some of them are cactus eaters, so these beaks are a little bit more pointed. And then we finally see these ones on the left. These are tree finches, and these ones live a little bit higher up in the trees. Unlike these guys on the right, they live down near the ground. These ones over on the left, these are tree finches, so they might eat the fruit. They also might eat insects, but notice their beaks are a little bit different than those seeds. They're not as powerful looking, but they have a little tiny little thing right on the end, and that allows them to get themselves into those insects and whatnot. So that's just an example of one type of biogeography study that we could do. We also see that very distantly related species might develop similarities in similar environments. So for an example here, we have ground-dwelling birds in the grasslands in Australia. They have very different body structures, but they have similarities due to the same selection pressures. So different grasslands around Australia might have different types of environments for them, but they've developed similarities. The body structures are a little bit different, but they might have some similarities due to the same selection pressures. Let's say, for example, food or carrying capacity or some of the things that might be located in the environment. Another example of evidence of evolution would be the fossil record. Now, it is extremely difficult for organisms to become a fossil. It's really difficult. There's a lot of different processes, and there's a lot of different things that actually go against becoming a fossil. So despite this, we do have a pretty good selection of fossils that we can use that provide evidence of evolution. The earliest fossils that we see actually appear in rocks about 1 to 2 billion years ago. Now, It seems like a long time ago, but there's actually a lot of things even previous to that that we're living that unfortunately have been lost due to just the mantle, the crust, all the movement of the plates, and that crust material will actually go back into the mantle and kind of become magma again. That's another story for another time, how to create fossils, but we've lost a lot previous to about 1 to 2 billion years ago. So we have the earliest fossil the fossil animals appear in rocks about 650 million years ago. The fossil record contains many examples of intermediates between groups. So things that might not exactly look like one thing or another thing, but we might have an intermediate in here. And that's kind of what this particular picture is showing you. There's a lot going on in this picture. If you notice that we have this example right here, this reddish orangey layer, it has these little hexagons in it. And then we see this white layer over here with a hexagon, and then this creature, or I'm sorry, these are pentagons. These little other creatures that seem to have little spikes on them, or legs perhaps. And then what we see, unfortunately, is that white layer is not preserved. So we don't actually see that transitional form happening in that time period. But this little yellow layer we see here, and it has both of these organisms. So it's kind of showing us that this organism here, this pentagon with the leg-looking things, this one was unfortunately not preserved in the time period that it started. So we can't see the intermediates here, but we do know that at least at this period in time, this yellow time, that's when that little the pentagon with the legs actually came about. Now, we see tons of these transitional fossils, and I'm on the screen right now is actually one of them. So this is our first example. And we have fish going to tetrapods. Now, tetrapods are those little animals that have 4 eggs or 4 legs that walk on the ground. In this case, we have a salamander. We have this guy up here. This is called a coelacanth. And tetrapods actually share a lot of ancestry with these types of fish, these lobe-fin fish. And these little fins down here, these lobes, these actually work like legs. The coelacanth, which is actually still living today, it was thought that these coelacanths were extinct, but they are still living today. These coelacanths can actually walk on land. So, of course, they need to spend more time in the ocean. That's where they live, but they have been seen walking. So, this is one of the earliest, or it's thought that this is one of the earliest types of fish to walk on land. And as we see here, we see several different types of transitional fossils along the way to what we see as a salamander today. So it started with a coelacanth, and now it's a salamander. So this is one example of a transitional fossil that we see from a fish to salamanders. Another example of transitional fossils are from dinosaurs to birds. Now, we know that birds are living descendants of dinosaurs. I know it seems a little far-fetched or maybe a lot of Jurassic Parkness, but they share a very similar pubic bone or a pelvis bone. So these bones, and I know we can't really tell from the pictures, but they have this very similar and the same shape pelvis bones between all these transitional fossils. Now this Archaeopteryx that we see here, this was actually the first dinosaur that they saw that scientists have seen with feathers. Much of these earlier, like the Coelophysis, much of these earlier dinosaurs we have not seen feathers on. So it's thought the Archaeopteryx is actually one of the earliest dinosaurs with feathers. So this way it now leads to our modern day bird, which right here kind of looks like a pigeon. But this is another example of transitional fossils, part of our fossil record, where we know that dinosaurs actually are still living today, just in the form of our birds. Now, what else does the fossil record tell us? Well, there's two ideas that might explain the rate of speciation, which is the formation of new species. So along the way, of course, in the fossil record, we see new species coming about. But there's two ideas to explain that. These two ideas are punctuated equilibrium and gradualism. Now, if you take just a gander at the names, you can probably pretty tell that gradualism is a gradual evolving of a species into a new species over long spans of time. So this is a very gradual, continuous change. There might be large phenotypic differences, so the outward appearance that we see is largely due to an accumulation of many small genetic changes. So remember, our phenotype is what we see. So this is our physical appearance, the physical aspect of these of your genes. So if you take a look at this bottom picture here, this is our gradual pattern or gradualism. So see here, we have a very slight difference in this first organism. It kind of looks like a moth or perhaps a butterfly. So this little butterfly here, there's a very slight difference in the coloring of the wings in this very first picture. But as you see, it kind of moves forward. So this bottom row shows a different species, whereas this top row will form a different species. Very gradual changes along the way. That changes the phenotypic difference. The second type is punctuated equilibrium. Now this happens in very short bursts of rapid change. Boom, very quick, boom, very short bursts of rapid change. And there's relative long time between the changes. So that's represented in this top picture right here. Notice we have this butterfly or this moth, and we have a boom, we have a quick change, and they're very, very different from the original moth or butterfly. And then a long, long, long time happens before any other changes actually happen. So it's very quick, short burst of rapid change. So with these two ideas of speciation, we kind of have an idea using the fossil record about how species come about and how they evolve over time by these either rapid bursts or long periods of evolving continuously over time.